The brain power of babies is not developed, and that of the aged failing when they die. Will they remain like that, or will all get the same level of intelligence in heaven?
Before answering this question, we must carefully distinguish between the brain and the intellect of man. The brain is a material bodily organ which the soul of man uses, just as any other organ, for the purpose of his composite life in this world. Now, the soul is a spiritual being endowed with a spiritual intellectual faculty, just as God or the angels have the spiritual power of intelligence. And just as the soul can exist without the body, so its intelligence can be operative without the brain, once it is released from the restrictions of union with the body. The material brain, therefore, belongs to the body. Intelligence belongs to the soul. Now we may proceed further. When the soul is released from the body by death, it no longer derives its knowledge from sense data, nor does it require the brain as a material organ of thought. It receives its knowledge either by God infusing necessary ideas, or by the immediate intuition of God's own essential and infinite perfection and truth. In purgatory, it will receive infused ideas according to its relative necessities. But in heaven, all the souls of the blessed will have the same intuitive vision of the full truth in God. Yet, whilst the same range of truth will be known to every intelligent soul, capacity to appreciate that truth and to rejoice in it will vary according to merit and virtue during one's life of probation on earth. All this applies to separated souls of whatever age prior to the resurrection of the body to which the brain as a material organ belongs. At the resurrection, it is the common opinion of Catholic theologians that the bodies of all, whether of children or of the aged, will rise in a state of perfect development, yet wholly changed and spiritualized in character, even though essentially the same bodies as those in which we served God during life. If we can speak of brain power in such risen bodies, all will attain the same level of development.
If so, do all attain the same level immediately after death?
The attaining of an equally developed material brain as a bodily organ cannot occur immediately after death, but will occur at the general resurrection of men's bodies. The attaining of an equal level of intelligence as far as the purely intellectual faculty of the soul is concerned does not occur during the stage of purification in purgatory, but occurs only when the soul is admitted to the very vision of God in heaven, a vision which is, of course, possible before the general resurrection of our bodies. But even in heaven, whilst the object known is the same for all, so that all intelligences are on the same level from that point of view, as I stated before, capacity to appreciate that object will vary according to one's meritorious service of God in this life. The extent of one's knowledge and the intensity of one's knowledge are two different things. Two men can equally have read 10 books, but one's powers of comprehension and appreciation might be much greater than the other's. In heaven, this difference in power of penetration will depend not upon grades of knowledge in this life, which do not necessarily make men better men, but upon goodness of life and the degree of virtue and love of God attained.
Don't you think that the idea of immortality is due merely to the desire to live on?
I know it's not due merely to that. Men without any desire to live on have the conviction. At the same time, normal people do desire to live on, and by such an irrepressible tendency that we must admit it to be a clear indication of immortality. Now, I do not say that everything a person wants to be true is necessarily true, but here we have not a transitory wish, not a momentary craving, but a natural tendency implanted in our very nature and always with us. Aristotle said long ago that nature does nothing in vain. The eye demands light, and there is light. Our very constitution demands air, and there is air. And it is part of our very nature to look forward to immortality. All men experience this urge at times. They have not to persuade themselves that they will live on. They have to try to persuade themselves that they will not, or else they just forget it. However, in addition to this argument from purposive tendencies, there are other reasons of equal and greater weight. The very nature of thought shows the soul to be immaterial and not subject to the laws of disintegration and destruction which govern all material things. We must consider also the facts of the moral law and the necessity of ultimate justice. All these arguments, taken together, are quite satisfactory to reason. If people say that they are not satisfied by such considerations, it is because they unreasonably expect too much. We cannot expect to prove the immortality of the soul as we can prove that lead is heavy by testing it on a pair of scales. But there are different orders of being with different orders of proof. Who would be so unreasonable as to deny the existence of humility because it can't be bought by the pound? All the reasonable proof of the immortality of the soul man can rightly demand is available.
Would you please amplify the evidence that the human soul is immortal?
Reason tells us that the soul is a spirit, not composed of parts like material things, and unable to disintegrate and go to pieces like material things. All corruption is disintegration of parts, but the soul has no parts. It is not a composite thing. It is a simple spiritual substance, and it must of its very nature continue when the body perishes. Again, all men as naturally judge that the soul is immortal as they are conscious that they exist. They do not have to persuade themselves that it's true, but that it's false. Man's intelligence, if not warped, seeks the truth for which it is built. It cannot rest contented with a lie. Left to itself, it spontaneously judges immortality to be a truth, and this universal judgment cannot be doubted without casting suspicion on all our faculties. Furthermore, God has established a moral law written on the conscience of men. He knows and loves the moral order he has established, and he is infinitely just. It is certain that right conduct cannot be ultimately the worse for a good man. Evil conduct cannot ultimately be for the good of an evil man. Things will be leveled up somewhere. Yet certainly they are not leveled up in this life. Public laws and human justice cannot cover interior wickedness. Honors are often conferred on the unworthy. An evil man has less remorse of conscience over a serious crime than a good man over a small fault. Since things are not rectified in this life, they will be in the next, and the responsible element of man will have to be there. It is not the body which we have seen die and which will rise only on the last day. It is the soul. From the viewpoint of fact, God has revealed that man's soul is immortal, and Christ raised at least 3 people to life from the dead, recalling their souls to their bodies, besides rising himself in the resurrection after his death on the cross.
All my own inclinations are to believe it, but desirability does not make it true.
I have already given you the reasons independent of man's natural inclinations. But even your inclinations here are a reliable indication. I admit that we do not find sufficient justification for believing a doctrine merely because it is a pleasant concept. But if you find yourself endowed by nature with deep-seated inclinations tending necessarily towards it, things are very different. This does not count for nothing. If all our thoughts go one way, if we have needs, desires, aims, and aspirations, all of which demand an object and imply by their own very existence that that object does exist also, then that object must exist. Could anyone conceive that God would form that most delicate organ of hearing, the ear, so wonderfully adapted to every kind of vibration, yet endow no objects with the power of causing sound? The whole tendency of the ear would be to hear, yet it would never do so because its complementary object would be wanting. Every natural tendency implies and has an object. More, if nothing in this life really and completely satisfies the soul, and if there be a message professing to be from God, teaching us that of which we already have the presentiment, and to provide the means to attain the destiny of happiness we crave, surely it is deserving of our attention. And, whilst I am at it, let me suggest to you that it is the Catholic religion above all others in the world that is most deserving of your attention.
Belief in immortality is most harmful. It diverts men's attention from the good they can do in this life.
It does just the opposite. It inspires still greater works of devotedness and charity in the cause of humanity for the love of God. And the doctrine is in the best interests of man. All mankind lifts its voice with mine. Generation after generation has agreed. In fact, it is, as I've said, part of man's very nature. The conviction of a future life is so deeply ingrained that it could not be based on a lie. It is as true an instinct as that of a baby which carries everything to its mouth, knowing that thus it will be nourished, though it can explain nothing about the processes of nutrition. Destroy man's conviction of immortality, and he degenerates, even as the fish taken out of the sea will perish, or the tree torn up by the roots will die. Most of those who deny immortality are interested in denying it, nor are they very convinced themselves of their position against immortality. They have no proofs whatsoever. They deny because they don't want to prepare for it.
Why do you Christians want a future life?
Why do you want to know that? You will say, well, it is natural for a man to desire knowledge. So I say that it is natural for man to desire further life beyond the few years earthly existence can offer.
I am perfectly happy in this world and will be quite content if death is the end.
No man is either perfectly happy or perfectly miserable in this life. Life is a succession of days alternating between joy and suffering. There are enough miseries in this life to prevent perfect happiness, yet enough happiness to compel us to look beyond this world for the complete fulfillment of lawful hopes. If death did end all, of course you would be neither contented nor discontented. You would be non-existent. And it is absurd to say that you are perfectly happy and to give that as a reason for being content even now with the prospect of death ending all. If you said that you were perfectly miserable and that you longed for death to end everything, you would speak more intelligently, even though that too would be an exaggeration.
So you deny that I am perfectly happy?
Yes. You will never come to a stage when all your desires are quite satisfied whilst you are still in this life. If you were perfectly happy and in want of nothing more, why would you bother seeking to secure a further knowledge you didn't possess? One who has all he wants seeks nothing more.
It is enough for a man if the good he does lives after him.
You are impelled to say that by the very desire of immortality. It is the effort to conquer time. Why should you want anything of you to live on? And if you want the lesser thing to live on, why not yourself? You are more important than what you do.
Would it not be better for men if death did end all?
To that I must say, firstly, that our conjectures as to what might or might not be better cannot alter the fact that man's soul will live on whether he likes it or not. Yet, secondly, the prospect of facing a future life is not fearful save to those who have reason to be afraid. The wicked have reason to tremble, the good to rejoice. Virtue should have a corresponding place in eternity, and if virtue, so also vice. As a matter of fact, all that is good in civilization has been built up by those who believe in an eternal destiny, and civilization tends to go to pieces when belief in immortality is destroyed. We need belief in eternal life in order to believe in the seriousness of this life.
I do not see why the soul could not evolve. If gasoline is sufficiently heated, it bursts into flame. Could not matter be rarefied by some natural process until it merged into spirit?
No. Rarefaction may turn a solid into a vapor, but a vapor is not spiritual. By condensation, a vaporized solid can be solidified once more, but a soul cannot be thus treated. Your analogy of the gasoline does not meet the case, for both flame and gasoline are in the same material order. But thought and matter are opposed to each other. The object of bodily sight may be a material thing, but the object of thought is an idea of the thing. Ideas are spiritualized abstractions outside the realm of matter. 2 and 2 potatoes make 4 potatoes. You can put them into a pan and fry them. But you cannot put the truth that 2 and 2 make 4 into a pan and cook it. The idea of that truth is not conditioned by space or time, and it is universal, not individual. At what place, at what time, or what individual material beings could evolve into the truth that 2 and 2 make 4?
Since animals already have sensitive life in common with man, why could not God merely add reason and will?
Because reason and will are purely spiritual powers and can belong only to a spiritual nature. Now, the brute soul is not spiritual of its very nature, and it could not be the subject of purely spiritual powers. The brute soul is essentially limited to the vital functions of a material organism and cannot transcend material conditions. But whilst the brute soul is essentially unfitted for higher spiritual operations, the human and spiritual soul endowed with reason and will can, when united with a body similar to that of animals, direct all the lower functions of which animals are capable. But we cannot argue that because a superior principle is capable of lower operations, an inferior principle is capable of higher operations. Nor can we say that the inferior principle could be endowed with higher powers when those higher powers belong to a completely different order of being. The essentially spiritual powers of reason and will require an essentially spiritual nature, and the brute soul is non-spiritual.